My name's Madison, I'm 27, and 3 weeks ago, I buried the only people who ever truly believed in me, my grandparents. But instead of grieving, I found myself in the middle of a storm I never saw coming. When the will was read, my parents' reaction wasn't love, it was greed, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more family drama, revenge, and emotional courage stories. The church smelled faintly of lilies, their sweetness mixed with candle smoke. I sat in the front pew, hands clenched so tightly together that my knuckles had turned white. My grandparents were gone, both of them only a week apart. It felt unreal, like some cruel mistake that hadn't caught up with me yet. People spoke in hushed voices around me. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in years shuffled by, offering me nods of sympathy. My parents sat just a few seats away, their expressions unreadable. My mom dabbed at her eyes, but I knew her tears came more easily for appearances than genuine grief. My father, stiff as stone, didn't even bother to fake emotion. When the service ended, the lawyer, Mr. Carlson, approached me quietly. His gray suit looked heavier than the day itself. He asked if I could step into the adjoining hall for the reading of the will. My heart sank. I had no idea that moment would change my life forever. We gathered in a small room with wood-paneled walls and a single buzzing light. My parents followed, my mother clutching her purse as if bracing herself for something valuable. My father's jaw tightened the way it always did before he expected to win. Mr. Carlson cleared his throat and began reading. I listened numbly as he went through legal phrases, his voice steady, unshaken. Then came the words that jolted me out of my fog. To our granddaughter, Madison Parker, we leave the entirety of our estate, including the sum of $26 million. The room fell silent. My ears rang as if someone had slammed a door beside me. I looked up, stunned, unsure if I'd heard right. 26 million? Me? My mother's gasp sliced through the air. What? Her voice cracked, sharp and shrill. She leaned forward, clutching the edge of the table. That has to be a mistake. Mr. Carlson shook his head gently. There's no mistake. Your parents made it very clear. Madison is the sole heir. My father's face flushed a dangerous shade of red. He slammed his palm against the table. You mean to tell me they left us nothing after everything we've done for them? I sat frozen, my throat dry, unable to speak. Part of me wanted to apologize, even though I hadn't chosen this. Another part of me, quiet but firm, felt the weight of my grandparents' choice. They had trusted me, not my parents. Madison, my mom said suddenly, turning toward me with wild eyes. You'll share it with us, won't you? You know, this money belongs to the family. Her words cut deep. Family. That word had always been slippery in our house. My parents had never been nurturing. My grandparents were the ones who raised me when my parents were too busy fighting or chasing their own ambitions. And now, in the middle of my grief, all they cared about was the inheritance. I stammered, I don't know what to say. You say yes, my father snapped. His voice carried the same tone he used when I was a child, the one that always made me shrink into silence. Mr. Carlson shifted uncomfortably, closing his folder. Perhaps we should give Madison some time. No, my father barked. We deserve an answer now. I looked between them, my chest tightening. The room felt smaller, suffocating. My grandparents had just been laid to rest, and already my parents were clawing at the money like scavengers. Finally, I whispered, I can't decide this today. The disappointment on my mother's face turned instantly to anger. After everything we sacrificed for you, you do this? Her words stung because they weren't true. they had provided the bare minimum, nothing more. My grandparents had been the ones who tucked me in at night, who showed up at my school plays, who celebrated my birthdays with genuine joy. I stood quickly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I need air," I muttered, hurrying out of the room before the tears could spill. Outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks. I leaned against the brick wall of the church, breathing hard. The world had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. I had gone from grieving granddaughter to accidental millionaire to target of my parents' fury. As I stood there, a memory flickered in my mind. A week before my grandmother passed, she held my hand in her hospital bed and whispered, "Don't let anyone change who you are. Promise me you'll use what we leave you wisely." At the time, I thought she was speaking in general terms, advice from a woman who always saw more than she said. Now, her words took on an entirely new weight. She knew this moment would come. She knew my parents would try to take what wasn't theirs. I wiped my eyes and straightened. Grief still weighed heavily on me, but beneath it, something else stirred. A spark of resolve. When I returned inside, my parents were waiting by the door. Their expressions had hardened. "This isn't over," my father muttered, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't answer. For the first time in my life, I realized silence could be stronger than words. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the envelope Mr. Carlson had given me, documents confirming the inheritance. The numbers on the page looked unreal, like they belonged to someone else. I should have felt relief, maybe even gratitude. Instead, I felt the heavy shadow of what it meant. This wasn't just money. This was a dividing line, a test of loyalty, a wedge that had already split my family in two. As the clock ticked past midnight, I whispered into the empty room, "Grandma? Grandpa? I hope I'm strong enough for this." The silence that answered me felt heavier than ever, but deep inside, I knew the fight had only just begun. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces at the church, my mother's pleading stare, my father's glare like a clenched fist. The quiet of my apartment, normally comforting, felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. By morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, text messages that ranged from sad emojis to angry demands. "Call us back. We need to talk about this now. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I ignored them all and poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembling. The sun hadn't even fully risen when a knock rattled my door. My stomach dropped. I didn't need to check to know who it was. When I opened the door, my parents stood there. My mother's face was tight, but painted with a shaky smile. "Morning, honey," she said, like this was a casual visit. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. He stepped inside without asking, towering over me. "We need to get this sorted," he said, his tone clipped. "The lawyer can transfer the money into our joint account this week if you sign." I blinked, startled by his bluntness. "Our joint account?" "Yes," he said. "It's the most practical solution. We'll manage it together as a family." Something in me flared, anger, maybe, or the first spark of defiance. "No," I said quietly, setting my coffee cup down. "That's not what Grandma and Grandpa wanted." My mother's lips trembled as she reached for my hand. "Madison, think about everything we've done for you. The food, the clothes, college tuition. That was your job as parents." I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Her face twisted with hurt, but her grip tightened. "You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us. We deserve this too." I stepped back, pulling my hand free. "You didn't visit Grandma in the hospital. You didn't even show up for Thanksgiving last year. They left it to me for a reason." That cracked something in my father. His voice rose, deep and booming. "Don't talk to your mother like that. You think you're better than us now, just because you got lucky?" "I didn't get lucky," I said, my throat tightening. They trusted me. That's not luck. He took a step closer, so close I could see the faint scar on his chin from when he'd fallen off a ladder years ago. If you don't do the right thing, you're going to regret this. The words hit like a threat, though he never raised a hand. I stood frozen, heart hammering, until they finally left, the door slamming behind them. The silence afterward was deafening. My apartment felt smaller, like the walls had closed in. I sank onto the couch, shaking. This wasn't just about money, it was about control. My parents weren't asking, they were demanding. Later that day, I drove to the park, the one my grandparents used to take me to as a kid. The playground was empty except for a couple of squirrels darting across the grass. I sat on the swing, rocking back and forth, as I tried to clear my head. I remembered summers here, my grandfather pushing me higher, my grandmother laughing from the bench. They had worked so hard their whole lives, saving every penny. They could have spent it on themselves, but they wanted to give me a future. As the wind whipped through my hair, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Finally, my mother said, her voice shaky, "Madison, please don't do this. You don't understand how much we need this money." "Then tell me," I said softly, "what do you need it for?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "We have debts. Your father's business hasn't been doing well. We could lose the house." My heart twisted. The house. The one I'd grown up in, the one that still had my height marked on the kitchen doorframe. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we thought we could fix it on our own," she said quickly. "But now we have a chance to get back on our feet. You could save us." I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to give in, to make the problem go away. But another part knew that once I gave them control, it would never stop. "I can help you," I said finally, "but I won't give you all of it. I'll talk to Mr. Carlson about setting aside enough to cover the house. Nothing more." There was a beat of silence, then her tone turned sharp. "That's not fair. We should be deciding this together as a family." "It's my decision," I said firmly. The next day, I woke to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten note in my father's blocky handwriting. "We're not giving up. Think about what's best for everyone." I crumpled the paper in my hand. The words weren't a request anymore. They were a warning. By the weekend, they showed up again, this time with my younger cousin, Jamie, in tow. Jamie looked uncomfortable, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Talk to her," my mother urged. "She listens to you." Jamie glanced at me apologetically. "Look, Mads, I get it. It's a lot of money. But maybe you could just share some of it. Make things easier." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "It's not about sharing, Jamie. It's about what's right." He nodded slowly, backing off. I tried. He muttered to my parents. After they left, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, staring at the inheritance papers. The pressure was suffocating. I hadn't even had time to grieve, to sit with the fact that my grandparents were gone. Every phone call, every visit, every note shoved that grief further down. That night, I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done since college. "I feel like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff." I wrote, "One wrong step, and I lose myself completely." Before bed, I double-checked that the locks on my door were secure. My parents had never crossed that line, but the look in my father's eyes that morning made me uneasy. When I finally lay down, my phone buzzed again, a message from my mom. "You're breaking this family apart." I turned off the phone and stared at the ceiling. No, I thought bitterly. I wasn't the one breaking anything. I was just the first one strong enough to say no. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, sharper, and harder to ignore. By the time I walked into work the next morning, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. It wasn't just the constant ringing, it was the silence that followed when I picked up, the heavy breathing, the deliberate pause before someone finally spoke. At first, it was my parents. "Madison, you're being selfish," my mother snapped during one call. "Do you have any idea how much your father and I sacrificed for you? That money is ours by right." Her voice carried that edge I had grown up fearing. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. But when I refused again, she hung up with such force that the click echoed in my ears long after. I thought that would be the end. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would cool down. Instead, things only spiraled. One afternoon, as I walked to my car after finishing a shift, I froze. A note was tucked under my windshield wiper. I thought it might be a parking ticket, but when I unfolded the paper, my stomach dropped. "You'll regret this. Blood is thicker than money." My hands trembled so hard the paper nearly slipped from my grip. The handwriting wasn't my father's. It wasn't my mother's. It was someone else's, someone they had dragged into this. I shoved the note in my purse, heart pounding, scanning the parking lot. A couple of coworkers were leaving, laughing and chatting. A delivery truck rolled by. Everything looked normal, but to me, it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like someone was always watching. The harassment didn't stay on the phone. It began seeping into every corner of my life. At work, a coworker named Jill whispered to me, "Hey, your mom called the front desk asking for your schedule. She said it was urgent. Is everything okay?" My cheeks burned. My parents had never even visited my job before, yet now they were calling the office, pulling other people into this madness. I forced a smile, murmuring something about family stress, but inside, panic twisted tighter. Later that day, my manager pulled me aside. "Madison," he said gently, "I don't want to pry, but we've had several calls here asking for you. Some of them weren't pleasant. Is everything all right at home?" Heat rushed to my face. I nodded quickly, insisting everything was fine. But the truth was, nothing was fine. Nights became the hardest. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the creak of pipes in the walls. Every small sound felt amplified. Then one night, I heard it, 3 sharp knocks at my front door. I froze. It was past midnight. No one knocked at that hour. Slowly, I tiptoed to the window and peeked through the blinds. No one stood there, only the quiet street, washed in pale orange from the streetlight. I waited, heart thudding, but no car drove away, no footsteps crunched on gravel. When I opened the door minutes later, another note sat on the welcome mat. "Family comes first. Don't make us teach you that the hard way." My knees buckled, and I sank onto the floor, clutching the note to my chest. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was intimidation. I tried confiding in a friend, Rachel, over coffee. She leaned in, brow furrowed as I told her everything. The calls, the notes, the way my parents' anger seemed to grow darker with each day. "Madison, this isn't normal," she said firmly. "You can't handle this on your own. You need to protect yourself." Her words struck me, but I shook my head. They're still my parents. I keep thinking, maybe they'll calm down if I just give them time. Rachel reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Time doesn't fix people who don't want to change. Please, at least tell someone officially. If not the police, then a lawyer. Anyone." I promised her I'd think about it, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I had the courage. The pressure from my parents didn't just escalate. It spread like wildfire. One evening, I ran into a distant cousin, Mark, at the grocery store. We hadn't spoken in years. But there he was, cornering me between the bread aisle and the dairy case. He began, voice low but sharp. "Your mom's been telling the family how greedy you are." after all they've done for you, and you're just sitting on all that money? Doesn't look good, Madison." I stared at him, speechless. My parents weren't just harassing me, they were poisoning others against me. The betrayal stung worse than the threats. By now, my days blurred together. Phone calls that left me shaking. Notes slipped under doors and onto windshields. Strained conversations with people who looked at me differently, as if I were the villain in my own story. And still, I held my ground. Every time my parents demanded, every time they screamed or begged, I repeated the same quiet answer. No, but inside I was unraveling. Sleep became a luxury. Food lost its taste. Even small joys, like watching my favorite cooking show or reading before bed, felt stolen from me. One night, while sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by unopened mail and cold tea, I whispered to myself, "How much longer can I take this?" The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with the weight of everything I couldn't escape. The harassment had escalated beyond what I ever imagined possible. And though I tried to be strong, a small voice inside whispered the question I didn't want to face. What if they never stopped? The night after that last threatening note, I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone in my hand, staring at the screen. My fingers hovered over the keypad for what felt like an eternity. I'd never called a lawyer in my life, but Rachel's words echoed in my head like a warning bell. You can't handle this on your own. I took a deep breath and made the call. The next morning, I sat in a quiet office with floor-to-ceiling windows, across from a woman named Claire, a calm but sharp-eyed attorney who listened without interrupting as I poured everything out, the calls, the notes, the late-night knocking. I didn't even realize I was crying until she passed me a tissue. "Madison," she said gently when I finally stopped talking, "you've already shown remarkable strength by not giving in. What your parents are doing could qualify as harassment and possibly coercion. But before we talk about legal action, I need to understand exactly what your grandparents will say." I slid a folder across her desk, my grandparents' carefully prepared documents tucked inside. She scanned the pages silently, her eyes narrowing in concentration. When she finally looked up, there was a faint smile on her lips. "This will is airtight. The inheritance was left solely to you. No contingencies, no shared claim. Your parents don't have a legal leg to stand on." Relief washed over me like cool water, but it didn't last. Claire's expression grew serious. "But that won't necessarily stop them from trying. If they escalate further, we can file for a restraining order. I can also send them a formal notice demanding they stop contacting you." I hesitated. "Wouldn't that make things worse?" "Possibly," she admitted, "but it also sends a clear message that you're not going to be intimidated. Sometimes that's what it takes to make people back off." I left her office with a mixture of hope and dread swirling inside me. On the one hand, I had legal protection now. On the other, I knew my parents wouldn't take this quietly. Sure enough, 2 days later, the first legal letter was delivered to them. Claire had sent a formal cease and desist, warning them to stop the harassment or face legal action. That same night, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't my mother or father. It was their attorney. "Ms. Lawson," he said, his tone clipped and formal, "your parents are extremely distressed by your recent actions. They believe the will does not reflect your grandparents' true wishes, and we will be pursuing legal remedies." My stomach nodded. The will was prepared by a licensed attorney and signed by both my grandparents, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "That may be," he replied, "but a family dispute of this nature could be resolved much more easily if you were willing to discuss a settlement. I'm not giving them a dime," I said quietly, and hung up. From that point forward, everything became a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings, and phone calls. Claire guided me through every step, filing motions, preparing documents, and reassuring me that the law was on my side. But the legal battle wasn't just about documents. It was about endurance. One morning, I walked into the courthouse for the first hearing, my palms sweating, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like everyone in the hallway could hear it. My parents were already there, sitting together on a wooden bench, their faces stiff. My mother's eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw something almost like sadness there, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold resolve. When the judge called our case, I stood next to Claire, my knees threatening to buckle. She spoke with confidence, presenting the will, the harassment notes, the phone logs. My parents' attorney countered, arguing that I was estranged from the family and that the inheritance was meant to support the whole household. At one point, my father stood up and said, "Your Honor, we raised Madison. We gave her everything she has. She owes us this." I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my eyes on the judge, trying to stay calm. When we left the courtroom that day, nothing had been decided yet. The judge scheduled another hearing to review all the evidence. But even that small delay felt like a victory. My parents hadn't won. Outside the courthouse, my father caught up to me. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I looked him straight in the eye for the first time in weeks. "You're right," I said. "It's not, but I'm not afraid of you anymore." He flinched just slightly before walking away. Weeks turned into months as the legal fight dragged on. Every hearing, every motion, every piece of evidence became a small battle in a larger war. One afternoon, Claire called me with news. "The judge has reviewed everything. There will be one final hearing next month. Be ready, Madison. This is where it all gets decided." I nodded, clutching the phone to my ear. "I'll be ready." But inside, fear and hope twisted together in a tight knot. When the final hearing came, I wore the navy blue blazer my grandmother had once given me, the one she'd said made me look strong and smart. I sat in the courtroom, hands clasped tightly in my lap, while Claire delivered her closing argument. This inheritance was not an accident, she told the judge. It was the deliberate choice of two people who loved their granddaughter and wanted to ensure her future. That choice must be honored. When the judge finally spoke, the words felt like a rush of air after being underwater too long. The court upholds the will. The inheritance remains solely with Ms. Lawson. I closed my eyes, letting out a shaky breath. For the first time in months, I felt the weight begin to lift. But as I left the courthouse, I caught a glimpse of my parents standing at the far end of the hall. My mother's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father's jaw was tight, and though the legal battle was over, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something much deeper, and I wasn't sure if anything could ever repair it. When I stepped out of the courthouse that day, the September air felt different, cooler, lighter. The judge's words still echoed in my head like a bell tolling freedom. The inheritance remains solely with Ms. Lawson. For months, I'd been living in fear, my every move shadowed by calls, letters, threats. And suddenly, it was quiet. But peace didn't come right away. I drove home slowly, almost cautiously, as if expecting my parents to appear in my driveway, waiting to yell at me one more time. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Even when I parked, I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the porch light, half dreading that I'd find another note taped to the door. There wasn't. Inside, I dropped my bag on the kitchen table and leaned against the counter, taking the first deep breath I'd taken in months. But as soon as I did, the silence felt heavy. For so long, my world had been filled with noise, arguments, threats, meetings, hearings. Now, there was just me, and I realized I didn't know what to do next. The following morning, I woke up before dawn, unable to sleep. I made coffee and sat at the small table in my kitchen, staring out the window as the sun began to rise. For the first time, I thought about what my grandparents would say if they could see me now. Would they be proud that I fought back, or sad that their gift had torn the family apart? That thought hit me hard. For weeks, my anger had carried me through, but now that the fight was over, grief poured in like a tide. I couldn't hold back. I cried until my coffee went cold. Later that day, I decided to visit their graves for the first time since the funeral. The cemetery was quiet except for the rustling of leaves. I knelt down, brushing my hand over their names carved in granite. "I did what you wanted," I whispered, my voice catching. I kept it, but it cost me Mom and Dad. The wind blew softly, and for a moment I could almost hear my grandmother's voice in my memory, calm, steady, reassuring. She'd always told me that doing the right thing wasn't supposed to be easy. I left a single sunflower, her favorite, before heading back to my car. In the weeks that followed, I started making changes, small ones at first. I hired a contractor to fix up the old farmhouse my grandparents had left me, not as a monument to the past, but as a place I could truly live. I painted the kitchen cabinets the pale yellow my grandmother had always talked about but never got to see. I replaced the worn carpet with wood floors and donated most of the furniture that reminded me of constant family arguments. It was a way of claiming the space as mine, not just legally, but emotionally. Still, some nights were hard. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, wanting to call my mom and tell her about the updates. Then I'd remember that we weren't speaking. One evening, I finally wrote her a letter, not to reconcile, but to put my thoughts into words. "Mom, Dad, I know you may never forgive me, but I need you to know this wasn't about money for me. This was about respecting the choice Grandma and Grandpa made. I wish we could find a way forward without hurting each other, but I can't go back to how things were. I'm choosing peace. I hope one day you can too." I never sent it, but writing it down felt like letting go of a weight I'd been carrying since that first confrontation. Slowly, life began to feel normal again. Rachel came over one Saturday with a bottle of wine, and we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields. "You look different," she said, smiling softly. "Lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted, for the first time in a long time. She raised her glass. "To new beginnings." I clinked my glass against hers and felt something warm spread through me, not just the wine, but hope. As months passed, I started using the inheritance in ways that honored my grandparents' memory. I set up a small scholarship fund at the local high school in their name, so kids who couldn't afford college would have a chance. I also adopted a dog from the shelter, a scruffy golden retriever mix I named Sunny. She followed me everywhere, filling the house with a joy I hadn't realized I was missing. One afternoon, as I was planting flowers in the front yard, a car slowed down in front of the house. My stomach twisted when I recognized the vehicle. It was my parents. They didn't get out. They just sat there for a moment, looking at the house, before finally driving away. I stood there, dirt still on my hands, my heart pounding. For a moment, I considered running after them, waving them down. But then I took a deep breath and let them go. I wasn't ready yet, but maybe one day I would be. Months later, on what would have been my grandmother's birthday, I hosted a small dinner with a few close friends. We cooked her favorite recipes, laughed, and shared stories. At one point, I caught myself looking around the table, smiling. This was the life I had fought for. Not just the money, not just the house, but the freedom to choose who I surrounded myself with, and the peace that came from living on my own terms. As the night wound down, I stepped outside with Sunny and looked up at the stars. "I'm okay now," I whispered into the night. For the first time, I believed it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living,